Hey guys, it's Jamie. Today I wanted to compare AWS with Firebase and just give you my opinion of like when you should use which and what each of them do. And yeah, so let's get into it. Alright, so to start off, I should probably say that I'm a little biased because I myself, I'm in sort of a startup mode right now. Like I have lots of new projects, and so I like for them to be free, and like the structure of my app is changing all the time, so I'm going to be a little bit biased towards Firebase because that's the one that fits those particular set of requirements. But with that in mind, let's go in and just compare like what exactly each of these does. So the first distinction is that Firebase is exclusively a NoSQL database. Okay, so I'll draw a picture to show you what I mean. Okay, so at the highest level in Firebase, in the backend, you have what's called collections. So you have a series of collections, and these can all point to different objects within that collection. And then these are called documents. So the structure always goes collection, document, and then these documents can also contain collections, which can contain more documents. So it's always that sort of pattern, guys. Always collection, document, collection, document. Now a document just stores values like name. Name equals Freddie, and a collection is like customers. So let's say the first one is a collection of customers, and then the documents in that are a bunch of objects with like one has name Freddie, one has name Bob, one has name Jill. Okay, and then let's say each of those documents also contains a collection for like transactions, like payments or something. So payments, and then each one of these objects down here would be a payment object with like the details like how much they paid, maybe like a transaction ID, something like that. Okay, so this is a NoSQL database model. So everything is very tree-like. So it's like everything's basically a tree, and it still is quite efficient. And this model is very, very flexible. So like there's nothing rigid about this structure. So like the user objects, one could have like a middle name, and then maybe another one doesn't even have a middle name because that person doesn't have one. So it's a very flexible object structure. Okay, so that's Firebase, which is a NoSQL database. As far as like Firestore goes, which is one of their databases. They also have another database for like storing files, like images and whatnot. And then they also have some other cool features I'll go over later. Okay, now AWS has both the NoSQL databases, which I mentioned before with Firebase, and they also have SQL databases. So what a SQL database is let me make another document here. Basically, a SQL database is a bunch of tables. That's all it is. Okay, so like a table can have an ID as one of the columns, maybe like a name that looks like it says nom. You get the idea. And then the last one is like their age. And let's say this is a table for like users. Okay, so like data stored inside a SQL database is always organized into a table. It has to be. It can't be stored any other way. So you'll have rows in here, each representing like a different person. So like in the previous example, the name is like Freddie, Joe, and Jill, I think I said. I forgot. And then they would all have ages. So you basically have to cram all that information into this table. Alright, and if there was like a middle name field over here, they would all have to either have a middle name or like a null value for the value in here. Like it has to have some sort of value, whether that be null or the empty string. The table requires you to fill it with something. So you can see that this is a very rigid structure, which sometimes you need this sort of structure So like if you're building an app which is very heavily dependent on like the relationships between things, this is the way to go, because these tables actually form what's called a relational database. So SQL is a type of relational database, and the reason it's called a relational database is because you can have multiple tables. So let's say I have another table over here, and maybe this holds like the ID of a user, and then like it relates to some other table. It's like a lookup table. So this is like maybe what payments they have. So it could be like the ID of whatever this guy is, and then maybe like a payment ID. So we'll do PID. And then, so this number will be like a lookup for an ID in another table, and that would be like the payments table. I'm running out of room here, but I think you guys get the idea. Like, these tables can all relate to each other, and you can have very complicated queries. So like if your app relies heavily on search and like the relationship between objects, then this is definitely the way to go. So if your app fits that structure, it's a very relationship heavy, and you need to like identify information that isn't stored all in one place. You're going to want to do SQL. I know entire companies which have fallen over because they chose to do noSQL instead of doing SQL. So be sure you really know what you're doing when you're setting this up. Otherwise, you could be in for a real treat later on when you find out that you can't get the data you need to, or you can't get the performance you need to. Yeah, so if you need SQL, definitely use AWS, or I think Google even has their own like cloud computing platform. But this video is mostly just comparing Firebase with AWS. Now you may be wondering, like, why would I choose Firebase when AWS has both SQL and noSQL databases? Well, I very frequently choose Firebase because of the Spark plan. They have a very generous plan. Like you can just use it for free, basically, like hosting a website, hosting your database, like cloud functions and other awesome things like storing photos and stuff. You can have all of that for free, basically. Not basically, it is free, as long as you don't exceed the limits. And if you do exceed the limits, it'll just tell you, hey, you hit your limit, and then it will just won't let you make any more requests, so then you can upgrade. And even the upgrading is super cheap. So Firebase is super economically friendly for startups and anyone who just doesn't really have a budget for this sort of thing. Like Amazon will bill you after the 12 months is over. So if you think you need your service up for longer than 12 months, and you just kind of don't want the stress of having to deal with those payments unless you really are successful, then definitely go with Firebase, as long as you are in need of a NoSQL database. Okay. So again, Firebase is super great because of the Spark plan. So the Spark plan is great for startups, like I was saying, because like you need some level of like free product in order to like bootstrap your startup without going broke, basically. So it's super good for startups. Also, I'm just generally a fan of Firebase's UI. I think it's a lot better than AWS. Like, it's very simple. And just to go over some other awesome features they have hosting and functions, which technically you can do those things in AWS as well, but they're just kind of a little bit more tricky to set up. Like, this hosting by default gives you HTTPS connection to your website, and that's just a pain to set up in AWS. So overall, especially for like startups, I definitely lean more towards Firebase because the structure is very flexible and the payment is a lot more forgiving and free in most cases, and it's just less of a headache. So like I said, I was biased, so you probably knew I was going to recommend Firebase, but not if you need a SQL database. Alright, so I think that's basically all for this video, guys. Hopefully that made sense. I tried to do my best to explain those concepts. They can be tricky if you haven't heard those terms before. Let me know if you have any questions in the comments below. Leave a like if you did enjoy this video. Subscribe if you haven't already, and I'll see you guys in the next video.